The life insurance policy had been a graduation gift from my grandfather when I finished my master's degree in criminology 3 years ago. At 28, I was the first person in our family to earn an advanced degree, and Grandpa Joe wanted to make sure I had proper financial protection as I started my career in what he called important work. Smart people plan ahead, he'd said, writing the check for the first year's premium on a $500,000 term life policy. This will give you a foundation to build on. You never know what dangers your line of work might bring. My sister Rachel, 31, had rolled her eyes when she heard about the gift. Who needs life insurance at 25? It's not like you have dependents or anything important to protect. Grandpa's just throwing money away on someone who probably won't even keep the job. My parents had agreed with her assessment. It seems premature, Mom said, examining the policy documents with obvious skepticism. Life insurance is for people with families and mortgages, not single women with entry-level government positions. Grandpa's just trying to make her feel important, Dad added dismissively. Like getting a degree in criminology makes her some kind of professional instead of just another government clerk filing paperwork. But I'd kept the policy active, paying the premiums religiously even when money was tight during my first year working for what my family called my dead-end government job. They assumed I was some kind of clerk or administrative assistant filing papers in a federal building somewhere, earning what Rachel constantly referred to as that cute little government salary. The truth was significantly more complicated. I worked as a federal financial crimes investigator, specializing in insurance fraud and identity theft cases. My criminology degree and subsequent FBI training had led to a position with the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division, where I spent my days tracking down people who committed exactly the kinds of fraud my family seemed to think were minor inconveniences or clever financial planning. My family's dismissive attitude toward my career wasn't new or surprising. Rachel worked as a regional sales manager for a major pharmaceutical company, earning what she constantly reminded everyone was real money in the private sector, not like those pathetic government paychecks. My parents were proud of her corporate success, her downtown office with city views, and her ability to afford luxury vacations and designer clothes. Sarah's government salary is so adorable, Rachel would say at family gatherings, her voice dripping with condescension. It's sweet that she has job security, even if the pay is absolutely terrible and there's no real advancement potential. At least she'll have decent benefits when she retires, Mom would add, as if I was already settling into a life of comfortable mediocrity. Government workers don't make much money, but they get good health care. Dad's perspective was more direct and cutting. Government work is for people who can't make it in competitive industries. Safe, stable, but not very ambitious. Some people just aren't cut out for the pressure of real business. They had no idea that my adorable government salary was actually quite competitive with private sector positions, or that my work involved complex financial investigations requiring exactly the kind of analytical skills and business acumen they thought I lacked. More importantly, they had no idea that my security clearance and specialized training made me one of the federal government's experts on financial fraud detection and prosecution. The insurance policy issue began escalating about 8 months ago when Rachel started experiencing what she diplomatically called career transitions. Her pharmaceutical company had been acquired by a larger corporation, and the new management had eliminated her position along with several others in a cost-cutting reorganization. I can't believe they laid me off after everything I contributed to that company, she complained bitterly at Sunday dinner shortly after receiving her termination notice. 7 years of consistent sales performance and they just throw me away like garbage. You'll find something even better, Mom assured her, reaching across the table to pat her hand sympathetically. Someone with your experience and proven track record won't be unemployed for long. The job market is absolutely brutal right now, Rachel said, stabbing at her food with obvious frustration. All the good corporate positions want candidates with specialized training, advanced degrees, or federal security clearances, things that take years to develop. Dad looked meaningfully in my direction. Maybe Sarah could help with networking. Government employees must know about other federal positions, and it sounds like those jobs have better security anyway. I work in a very specific field, I said carefully, trying to avoid revealing details about my actual responsibilities. I'm not sure what positions might be available that would match Rachel's background in pharmaceutical sales. What exactly do you do all day? Rachel asked with obvious irritation and growing suspicion. You always give these incredibly vague answers about government work and sensitive information, like you're some kind of secret agent or something. Some aspects of my job do involve confidential investigations and sensitive financial information, I replied truthfully, though I knew she wouldn't take the answer seriously. Rachel laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth or humor. Confidential investigations? You're not CIA or FBI, Sarah. You probably process unemployment benefit applications or Social Security paperwork. Let's not pretend your filing job involves national secrets. My parents nodded along enthusiastically with her assessment. In their minds, the idea that I might have an important, sophisticated, or well-compensated position was apparently so absurd it didn't warrant serious consideration. The point is, Dad said firmly, steering the conversation back to what he considered practical matters, Rachel needs help getting back on her feet financially while she conducts her job search. We were thinking you could lend her some money, Mom added hopefully. Just a temporary loan until she finds a new corporate position. I looked at my sister, who was nodding as if this was not only reasonable but long overdue. How much money are you talking about? Maybe 15 or 20,000, Rachel said with casual confidence. Enough to cover my mortgage payments and car insurance for several months while I conduct a proper executive-level job search. I don't have that kind of liquid savings available for loans, I said honestly. My salary was competitive, but I was also aggressively paying off graduate school loans and building my own emergency fund according to strict financial principles. What about that ridiculous life insurance policy Grandpa bought you? Rachel asked, her tone becoming calculating. Can't you borrow against the cash value or cancel it for a refund? It's term life insurance, not whole life or universal. There's no accumulated cash value to borrow against. Rachel's expression became increasingly calculating and determined. Well, it's not like you actually need life insurance anyway. You don't have children, a spouse, or anyone depending on your income. Maybe you should just cancel the entire policy and use those premium payments to help family members who actually have real financial responsibilities. The policy costs about $400 annually, I pointed out. That's not going to solve serious unemployment-related financial problems. It's about the principle of family loyalty, Dad said with growing firmness. Family members should help each other during crises, and you're being selfish by maintaining unnecessary insurance policies while your sister faces potential foreclosure. Besides, Mom added with obvious frustration, if something tragic happened to you, who would even benefit from a life insurance payout? You don't have anyone depending on you financially, so that money would just disappear into legal proceedings. The conversation was frustrating but entirely familiar. My family had a long-established pattern of treating my financial decisions as communal property subject to their input and approval, while simultaneously keeping their own money and financial choices completely private. Rachel had never offered to help with my student loan payments during my early career, and my parents had never suggested she should cancel her own insurance policies or liquidate investments to contribute to general family financial needs. Over the following weeks and months, the pressure intensified dramatically as Rachel's job search proved more difficult than she'd anticipated. The pharmaceutical industry was contracting, and her specific experience didn't translate easily to other corporate sectors. She started showing up at my apartment unannounced, asking for what she called small temporary loans that gradually increased in size and urgency. Just $800 for groceries and utilities this week became, "Can you cover my car payment so I don't lose transportation to interviews?" which rapidly escalated to, "I need $3,000 for my mortgage payment or the bank will start foreclosure proceedings." Each request came with increasingly elaborate guilt trips about family loyalty, sisterly obligations, and reminders that I had guaranteed government job security, while she was struggling through the worst unemployment crisis in decades. "You're literally the only person in our entire family with stable income right now," she'd say during these impromptu visits. "It's incredibly selfish to hoard money in savings accounts when I'm facing homelessness and financial ruin." When I couldn't meet her increasingly large and frequent financial demands, Rachel started focusing obsessively on the life insurance policy again, bringing it up at every family gathering and phone conversation. "That policy is just sitting there doing absolutely nothing productive," she'd argue with growing frustration. "If you really cared about family welfare, You'd find a way to make that insurance work for all of us instead of just yourself. Life insurance isn't an investment vehicle or emergency fund, I'd explain patiently. It's specifically designed to provide income replacement if something happens to the policyholder. But you don't have dependents or financial obligations that would require income replacement. Who cares if your government salary stops when you die? You're not supporting children or a spouse. The logic was cold and calculating, but it was entirely consistent with my family's general attitude toward my life choices and personal value. In their collective view, since I wasn't married with children, my life, career, and financial security were inherently less important than Rachel's immediate economic needs. 4 months ago, Rachel finally found a new position at a smaller pharmaceutical company, but her financial problems actually intensified rather than improving. The new role paid almost 40% less than her previous position, and she was struggling to adjust her lifestyle and spending habits to match her dramatically reduced income. I have to maintain my professional image and networking relationships, she explained defensively when I suggested she consider downsizing her expensive downtown apartment. Client-facing pharmaceutical sales roles require a certain standard of living and professional presentation. Maybe consider finding a roommate to split housing costs, I suggested. Shared living arrangements could significantly reduce your monthly expenses. I'm 31 years old, Sarah. I'm not living with roommates like some recent college graduate who can't afford her own place. The pride was understandable from a personal perspective, but it was also financially devastating. Rachel continued spending as if she still earned her previous salary, using credit cards and personal loans to bridge the ever-widening gap between her lifestyle expectations and her new economic reality. By Christmas, she was carrying serious debt across multiple credit cards and becoming increasingly desperate about her deteriorating financial situation. Her conversations became obsessed with quick solutions and get-rich schemes that would restore her previous standard of living without requiring fundamental lifestyle changes. I've been researching your life insurance policy more seriously, she announced during our family's traditional holiday dinner. What if I became the primary beneficiary instead of your estate or whatever legal entity currently gets the money? I looked up from my plate, genuinely confused by the suggestion. Why would you want to be my life insurance beneficiary? Well, think about it logically, she said with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. If something tragic happened to you, at least the insurance money would stay within our immediate family instead of just disappearing into probate court proceedings or legal fees. I don't plan on dying anytime soon, I said with what I hoped was a reassuring laugh. Of course not, but accidents and unexpected illnesses happen to everyone, she continued with growing enthusiasm. And since you don't have a spouse, children, or anyone else who would need financial support, wouldn't it make much more sense for your sister to be the beneficiary? Mom and Dad were nodding along enthusiastically, as if this was not only reasonable but long overdue. Sarah's always been the responsible, practical one in our family, Mom said approvingly. It would be just like her to make sure her insurance money stays with people who really understand how to manage it properly. It's actually quite thoughtful when you think about it, Dad added with obvious satisfaction. Making Rachel the beneficiary would provide her with long-term financial security and peace of mind. I found their reasoning somewhat odd but didn't think too much about it at the time. People named family members as life insurance beneficiaries constantly, and Rachel was technically correct that I didn't have dependents who would need the financial protection if something happened to me. I'll consider it and maybe discuss it with my insurance agent, I said diplomatically, mostly trying to end the conversation and move on to other topics. But Rachel wasn't willing to wait for my decision or trust me to follow through on my promise to consider her suggestion. 3 weeks ago, I received an unexpected phone call from my insurance company's customer service department during my lunch break at work. Ms. Martinez, we're calling to confirm some recent changes made to your policy, the representative said in a friendly, routine tone. What kind of changes? I asked, immediately feeling a chill of suspicion. According to our system, you contacted us last week to update your primary beneficiary information. We just want to verify that everything is correct in our records. My stomach dropped. I definitely haven't made any calls to change my policy. Let me pull up the specific details, the representative said. I could hear rapid typing in the background. The modification was requested by telephone last Tuesday afternoon, using your complete policy number and social security number for identity verification. Someone else must have called pretending to be me, I said, my mind immediately jumping to the obvious suspect. According to our call logs, the person requesting the change knew your complete personal information and answered all our security questions correctly, the representative continued. The primary beneficiary was changed from your estate to Rachel Martinez, listed as your sister. I need to report this as fraud immediately, I said, already mentally shifting into my professional mindset as a financial crimes investigator. We'll initiate an investigation right away. Can you come to our regional office tomorrow morning to file a formal complaint and provide documentation? I spent the remainder of that day conducting a thorough review of all my financial accounts, credit reports and personal information, looking for additional signs of identity theft or unauthorized access. The insurance beneficiary change was the only irregularity I discovered, but it was a significant and serious violation. At the insurance company's regional office the next morning, I met with their senior fraud investigator, a woman named Patricia Chin, who explained the full legal implications of what had occurred. Unauthorized changes to life insurance policies constitute federal crimes when they involve interstate commerce, she explained while reviewing my documentation. Your sister accessed your policy using personal information that she had no legal authority to use for financial transactions. She's family, I said. She naturally knows my social security number and other basic identifying information from years of shared family interactions. Family relationships don't provide legal authority for identity impersonation in financial transactions, Chin replied firmly. This is textbook identity theft and wire fraud, regardless of the family connection. The insurance company's internal investigation revealed that Rachel had called from her office phone number, using my complete personal information to convince their customer service representative that she was actually me calling to make routine policy changes. She'd then provided her own contact information as the new primary beneficiary, effectively stealing control of a $500,000 financial instrument. We'll need to report this to federal authorities immediately, Chin explained. Insurance fraud involving interstate commerce falls under FBI jurisdiction, and we're required by law to report all suspected violations. Can't we just reverse the unauthorized changes and handle this privately within the family? I asked, even though I already knew the answer from my professional experience. The federal crime has already been committed, Chin said sympathetically. Your sister used interstate wire communications to commit fraud against a regulated financial institution. That's a serious federal offense regardless of whether we can reverse the policy changes. I drove home that afternoon feeling sick with dread about what was about to happen to my family. Rachel had committed multiple serious federal crimes over a life insurance policy she felt entitled to control, apparently having no idea that identity theft and wire fraud carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. That weekend was our regular monthly family dinner, and Rachel seemed unusually cheerful and confident when I arrived at my parents' house, as if she'd successfully solved some major ongoing problem. You look great, she said, hugging me enthusiastically at the front door. How's everything going with that boring government job of yours? Everything's fine, I said carefully, studying her expression and body language. She seemed completely relaxed and self-satisfied, as if she'd accomplished something clever and helpful. During dinner, conversation remained light and casual until dessert was being served. Then Rachel cleared her throat dramatically, as if she had an important announcement to share with the family. I made myself beneficiary on your policy, sister revealed at family dinner, smiling proudly as if she'd done something not only helpful but admirably decisive. The room fell completely silent. Mom and Dad looked confused and uncertain. What policy are you talking about? Dad asked slowly. Sarah's life insurance policy. The expensive one Grandpa bought her that she never uses, Rachel explained with obvious satisfaction. I called the insurance company and had them change the beneficiary designation to me instead of her estate. You're too irresponsible to handle money, Dad supported her immediately, nodding with approval. Rachel's always been much better with financial planning and long-term decision-making. Besides, Mom added enthusiastically, if something terrible happened to you, we definitely want that insurance money to stay within our immediate family anyway. I stared at my sister in stunned disbelief. watching her look pleased with herself for taking what she clearly considered appropriate initiative in family financial planning. "How exactly did you change my insurance policy?" I asked as calmly as possible. "I called the insurance company customer service line and told them I was you," Rachel said casually, as if this was perfectly normal and reasonable. "It was surprisingly easy. They just asked for your social security number and policy information, which I obviously know." "That's identity theft," I said quietly. Rachel laughed dismissively. "Don't be so dramatic and legalistic. It's not identity theft when it's family members making practical decisions. I just updated your beneficiary information to someone more appropriate and responsible." "You committed wire fraud by impersonating me," I continued. "I protected our family's financial interests," Rachel corrected with growing irritation. "You don't have anyone else who would need that insurance money anyway, so this makes perfect sense." Dad nodded approvingly. Rachel's thinking practically about family financial planning. She's always been good at managing complex money matters. "Sarah's never been comfortable with major financial decisions," Mom added supportively. "It's smart to have Rachel handle the more sophisticated aspects of insurance and estate planning." I said quietly, "I'll speak to my insurance agent." "You really don't need to involve outside professionals in private family business," Rachel said quickly, her confidence wavering slightly. "I've already taken care of everything properly. Besides," Dad added firmly, "what's done is done. There's no point in complicating a simple family arrangement by involving insurance agents and outside advisors. The policy beneficiary situation is perfectly fine as it stands now," Mom agreed. "Rachel will be responsible and appropriate with that money if it's ever actually needed." I excused myself from dinner early that evening, citing urgent work obligations that required my immediate attention. My family didn't seem particularly concerned about the legal implications of what Rachel had done, treating her identity theft and wire fraud as reasonable family financial coordination rather than serious federal crimes. The following morning, I arrived at the FBI field office where I worked and immediately requested a meeting with my supervisor to discuss the personal situation that had developed. "Your sister committed wire fraud and identity theft against you," Special Agent Thompson said after I explained what had happened over the weekend. "This is precisely the kind of financial crime our division investigates and prosecutes regularly." "She's my sister," I said, even though I knew family relationships were irrelevant to federal criminal law. I was hoping there might be some way to handle this situation quietly or privately. "I understand this creates difficult personal complications," Agent Thompson replied sympathetically, "but she used interstate wire communications to commit fraud against a regulated financial institution. This crime falls under federal jurisdiction regardless of your family relationship to the perpetrator." Agent Thompson was absolutely correct, of course. The same federal laws I spent my career enforcing against strangers applied equally to family members who committed identical crimes. Personal relationships didn't create exemptions from wire fraud or identity theft statutes. "What happens now in terms of standard procedure?" I asked. "We follow normal investigation protocol," Agent Thompson explained. "We'll coordinate with the insurance company's fraud investigation division, document all available evidence, and pursue appropriate federal charges through the U.S. Attorney's Office." "How serious are the potential charges?" "Wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Identity theft adds another mandatory 5 years. The dollar amount involved makes this a high-value financial crime case." I thought about Rachel sitting at family dinner the previous evening, proudly describing her clever solution to what she saw as an inefficient family financial arrangement. She apparently had no idea that she'd committed multiple felonies that could result in decades in federal prison. "She used her office telephone to make the fraudulent call to the insurance company," I added. "There should be a clear electronic trail documenting the crime." "Office phone records actually strengthen our case significantly," Agent Thompson noted. "We'll have precise documentation of when the call was made, from what number, and we can subpoena her employment records to establish her access to office communication systems." Within hours of our meeting, federal wire fraud investigators were coordinating with the insurance company's security division to trace Rachel's fraudulent call and compile comprehensive evidence. Her office phone records clearly showed the exact time and duration of her call to the insurance company's customer service line. By Thursday morning, federal agents had obtained arrest warrants for Rachel based on overwhelming evidence of identity theft and wire fraud. The investigation had moved with extraordinary speed because the evidence was recent, comprehensive, and documented through multiple independent sources. "We'll arrest her at her workplace," Agent Thompson explained during our briefing meeting. "That's standard protocol for white-collar financial crimes committed using office resources and during business hours." I was at my desk reviewing other case files when my personal cell phone rang that afternoon. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Sarah, something absolutely terrible has happened," Mom said, crying hysterically. "Rachel's been arrested at her office by federal agents." "What are the charges?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They're saying she committed wire fraud and identity theft against you," Mom continued through her tears. "Federal agents arrested her in front of all her co-workers and supervisors." I could hear Dad shouting angrily in the background about constitutional rights, police overreach, and the need for expensive criminal defense lawyers. "They confiscated her computer and all her office files," Mom continued. "Her supervisor fired her immediately, and they escorted her out of the building in handcuffs." "What specifically did the federal agents tell you about her alleged crimes?" "Something about insurance fraud and stealing your identity to change financial documents," Mom said, her voice becoming confused and uncertain. "But that's completely impossible. She was just updating your beneficiary information as part of normal family financial planning." Dad took the phone away from Mom. "This is clearly a massive misunderstanding," he said angrily. "Rachel was helping coordinate your financial affairs, not committing crimes against you. She impersonated me to change my insurance policy without my knowledge or permission," I explained calmly. "That constitutes identity theft and wire fraud under federal law." "Don't be ridiculous," Dad snapped. "Family members can't steal from each other or commit identity theft. This is just bureaucratic nonsense." "Yes, they absolutely can. And Rachel did exactly that." "You actually reported your own sister to federal law enforcement?" Dad's voice was filled with incredulous anger and disbelief. "I reported identity theft and wire fraud to the appropriate authorities. The fact that the perpetrator happens to be my sister doesn't change the criminal nature of her actions." Mom took the phone back. "How could you possibly do this to Rachel?" she demanded. "She was just trying to help organize family finances in a more efficient way." "She committed multiple federal felonies, Mom. This isn't about family financial planning. Over a stupid insurance policy that you don't even need or use. The specific purpose or value of the targeted financial instrument doesn't matter under federal law. Identity theft and wire fraud are serious crimes whether someone steals $50 or $500,000. There was a long pause on the line. Then Dad's voice in the background. "Did you say $500,000? That's the face value of the life insurance policy Rachel fraudulently changed without my knowledge or consent." "We had absolutely no idea the policy was worth that much money," Mom said quietly, her voice changing tone completely. "Rachel knew the value. That's precisely why she wanted to become the beneficiary." The conversation ended abruptly with my parents hanging up on me without another word. Over the following week, additional details about Rachel's legal situation became increasingly clear and serious. Federal prosecutors were pursuing wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges based on the systematic nature of her crime, researching my personal information, planning the fraudulent telephone call, successfully impersonating me to insurance company representatives, and then lying to family members about her criminal actions. The premeditated and calculated nature of her fraud suggested this wasn't an impulsive mistake or moment of poor judgment, but rather a carefully planned crime designed to steal control of a valuable financial asset. Rachel's new employer terminated her immediately upon learning about her federal arrest and the nature of the charges against her. Pharmaceutical companies maintaining federal contracts and regulatory relationships couldn't risk associating with employees under investigation for financial fraud crimes. Her criminal defense attorney strongly advised her to accept a plea agreement rather than risk trial on federal charges that could potentially result in 25 years in federal prison if she were convicted on all counts. Rachel ultimately pled guilty to wire fraud and identity theft in exchange for a negotiated sentence of 4 years and 6 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full restitution to the insurance company for their investigative costs and security upgrades. At her federal sentencing hearing, she read a carefully prepared statement about family financial stress, unemployment pressures, and what she characterized as momentary poor judgment rather than deliberate criminal intent. The defendant's explanation suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of legal boundaries, property rights and personal autonomy, Judge Martinez observed during the sentencing proceedings. Family relationships don't override federal criminal law or justify identity theft and wire fraud. Ms. Martinez used sophisticated knowledge of insurance industry procedures and her sister's personal information to commit premeditated financial fraud, the federal prosecutor added. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment or family miscommunication. It was a calculated crime involving identity theft, wire fraud, and systematic deception. Rachel received 4 years and 6 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She'll also be required to pay full restitution for investigative costs and will be permanently barred from working in financial services, insurance, or any industry requiring fiduciary responsibility. My parents attended the sentencing hearing, sitting silently in the back row while federal judges and prosecutors explained how their daughter's family financial planning constituted systematic fraud that violated multiple federal statutes designed to protect victims of identity theft. After the hearing concluded, Dad approached me in the courthouse hallway, his face reflecting a mixture of anger and defeat. "I hope you're satisfied with the outcome," he said bitterly. "Your sister is going to spend the next 4.5 years in federal prison because of your decision to involve law enforcement. Rachel is going to prison because she chose to commit multiple federal crimes," I replied calmly. "I didn't force her to steal my identity or commit wire fraud. You could have handled this privately within the family. Federal crimes involving interstate commerce cannot be handled privately. They must be investigated and prosecuted according to federal law." Mom joined our conversation, her eyes red from crying throughout the sentencing hearing. 4.5 years in federal prison over what she thought was a simple family misunderstanding. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I corrected. "Rachel knew she was impersonating me when she called the insurance company. She committed deliberate fraud." "We had no idea you worked for the FBI," Dad said accusingly. "If we'd known you were a federal agent, we never would have suggested she update your beneficiary information. You should have asked about my actual job responsibilities instead of assuming I was incompetent. How were we supposed to know your government work was important or significant? By showing basic interest in my career and life choices instead of dismissing everything about me as unimportant." Mom shook her head sadly. "Your own sister is going to federal prison because you cared more about bureaucratic rules than family relationships. My sister is going to prison because she committed identity theft and wire fraud against a federal law enforcement officer. Those are serious crimes with mandatory prosecution requirements." I walked away from my parents that day and made the decision not to maintain contact with them going forward. Rachel is currently serving her sentence in a minimum security federal facility located in another state. She'll be eligible for early release in 3.5 years if she maintains good behavior and successfully completes financial crimes education and rehabilitation programs. My life insurance policy was restored to its original beneficiary designation, my estate, with enhanced security procedures to prevent similar fraud attempts. The insurance company provided me with a commendation letter for my cooperation in their investigation and subsequent security improvements. I continue working federal financial crimes cases, though I've been transferred to different investigation teams to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. My colleagues know me as a thorough and dedicated investigator who understands the serious personal impact of identity theft and fraud on victims' financial security and peace of mind. Sometimes family members convince themselves that blood relationships excuse criminal behavior. Sometimes they're so focused on their own financial problems that they don't recognize when they're committing serious felonies against people they claim to love. And sometimes, the family member they're targeting for identity theft and fraud happens to be the exact federal agent trained to investigate and prosecute their specific crimes. Rachel learned about federal wire fraud and identity theft law in the worst possible way, from a federal courtroom, wearing an orange jumpsuit, listening to a judge explain how family relationships don't override criminal statutes or justify stealing other people's financial assets. I learned about these laws much earlier, through FBI training academies and years of prosecuting people who thought their personal circumstances justified their criminal choices. In the end, federal law treats everyone equally, whether they're strangers committing fraud against random victims or sisters stealing from federal agents they assumed were too unimportant and powerless to fight back effectively. The difference is that federal agents know exactly how to document evidence, coordinate with prosecutors, and ensure that justice is served efficiently, thoroughly, and completely. Rachel's 4.5-year sentence reflects not just the seriousness of her crimes, but the comprehensive nature of an investigation conducted by someone who understood exactly what evidence would be needed to prove federal wire fraud and identity theft beyond any reasonable doubt.